In Italy, on August 11, 1944, the commanding general of the 15th Air Force assembled staff chiefs for final briefing of the part that Air Force would play in the coming invasion of southern France.
The Allied forces are making a landing on the south coast of France, August 15th, D-Day. This Air Force will support that landing. The operations intelligence officer will go ahead and give you all a thorough briefing. I'd like to repeat again, this will not be mentioned outside of this group from now on the 15th.
Colonel Young will give us the enemy intelligence situation and defenses, both ground and air, in the target area. Gentlemen, there are 8 divisions defending south of France.
The plan called for American, French, and British to launch a sea and airborne invasion along the 125-mile strip of the French Mediterranean coast between Nice and Marseille. The Air Force was to throw its full striking power to support the D-Day landings. The entire operation was to complement those in northwestern France. This same morning, B-25s flew from Corsica to join other large groups of mediums and heavies in a violent prelude to invasion. The purpose was to isolate the prospective battle area, intensifying attacks against all enemy installations. These Mitchells loosed their bombs on gun positions at Saint-Tropez. In this preparatory period, shuttle bombers from Italy, Corsica, and Sardinia sowed 4,000 tons of bombs on defenses along the shore and inland communication lines. On August 13th, a bridge across the Rhone near Avignon, an important railroad junction 52 miles northwest of Marseille, was bombed by B-24s. On this and the preceding day, 600 to 800 heavy bombers shattered objectives in northern Italy and southern France. They were heavily escorted by P-38s and P-47s, which attacked radar stations with excellent results, while the bombers destroyed many important strategic bridges like this one at Avignon. Enemy aircraft were still absent, but flaked down 17 heavies on the 12th and 8 on the 13th. On August 14th, D-Day -1, gun positions at the great naval base of Toulon were attacked by B-17s. Nearly 700 heavies repeated the bombing pattern of the previous 2 days in 50 separate attacks. Lightnings and thunderbolts were still at work against radar stations, blinding the enemy to the approaching invasion surface fleet. These pre-invasion bombings ranged far and wide along the Italian and French coasts to create enemy uncertainty about Allied landings and cause him to disperse his forces. The island of Levant received particular attention from B-24s on August 14th. Levant and Port Creux stood as sentinel islands 10 miles off the coast below Cap Negre, in line with the focal point of the invasion. Heavy gun installations there guarded invasion waters, made the Allied convoy vulnerable. En route to the target, B-24s passed over Liberty ships and landing craft headed for the rendezvous point. Capture of these island strongholds was necessary for the complete success of the landings. After the heavies had thoroughly neutralized gun installations, men of the 1st Special Service Force, a crack Allied outfit composed of specialists in combat versatility, stormed the island that night. Great caution and skill were needed to eliminate final opposition quietly without alerting the mainland. This had been done by the first hours of D-Day. And in those first dark hours of D-Day, bomber crews arrived at their planes for last-minute briefing. Some were to precede troop carriers, bombing searchlights and anti-aircraft batteries that might attempt to intercept the airborne troops. Other bombers were to attack airfields. Defenses along the coast, which concentrated aerial bombardment of the preceding days hadn't knocked out, were to be blasted in these final hours before Allied warships and landings completed the job. At first light, some heavies switched from strategic to tactical targets. joining the mediums in a concentrated assault against beach obstacles. Others pounded highways and bridges. Roads and communications were bombed near Frejus, one of the principal targets on the well-saturated 30-mile sector from west of Caen to east of Toulon. Later, at 8:30 hours that morning, seaborne forces hit the beach at Frejus and made deep penetrations inland. "140 marauders attacked gun positions in the landing area and the beaches north of Cavalaire. Throughout the entire operation, anti-aircraft was negligible and the Luftwaffe continued to be absent. To destroy whatever German troops and guns remained, final coastal bombings were made. 100-pound bombs were used in order to avoid blasting large craters that would impede the thrust across the beaches. One group of liberators bombed 5 highway bridges over the Rhone River between Valence and Avignon, along the natural pathway toward northern France. Troop carrier planes had started pouring parachutists onto inland areas at 4:30 hours, 4 hours before the seaborne invasion. In this, too, opposition was scanty. These men, as well as the seaborne troops, were veterans of North African, Sicilian, Salerno, and Anzio landings. They had been put through weeks of intensive special training for this invasion, which they found later was far easier than the others. At the same time, back at Allied air bases, gliders were taking off. Heavily laden with guns, supplies, equipment, and men, they were towed out over the Mediterranean. Covered by Allied fighters, the gliders were taken behind enemy coastal defense lines. And as troop carrier planes, some towing gliders, some loaded with paratroops, approached the dropping zones, they were right on schedule. Parachutes left by troops that had gone in during the night dotted the land. These landings were made close to Le Mitan and Le Mouille and San Rafael. Securing the hilly country and back to the beaches to forestall any Nazi retreat was the main job of the airborne troops. They were to help put pressure on the enemy's shells on the inside. Some gliders, coming in fast, made spectacular landings. Shells and supplies were quickly unloaded and put to use. Within 3.5 hours of landing, this crew had 8 mortars in firing position. German ammo dumps were destroyed while patrols formed roadblocks and drove to key points. Meanwhile, more than 800 warships, greatest naval force ever assembled in the Mediterranean, was massed over 40 miles of sea to effect widely separated landings. An armada composed mainly of American, British, and French vessels, it included Canadian, Dutch, Polish, Greek, and Belgian ships. For 3 hours before the landing assault, big guns of this international navy thundered bombardment against shore defenses. Amplified by the Air Force bombs that were salvoed almost simultaneously, it was said to have been more effective gunfire than any previously laid down in the Mediterranean. Behind this curtain of fire, small craft awaited the signal to move in. As the time neared for the seaborne invasion to land, all available air power carried capacity loads of explosives to pour on all visible targets. Lightnings, thunderbolts, and bombs struck at enemy armor and troop concentrations in the rear. Flying more than 1,000 planes during the morning, hundreds of fire attacking gun emplacements and transportation facilities. Fighters escorted troop carriers to their objectives, provided cover for both troops and ships, and stopped motor transport and other targets of opportunity. Meantime, mediums and heavies, leaving the Navy to continue the job they started of clearing the beaches, swept inland. As H hour approached, beachhead bombing was restricted because overcast conditions constituted a hazard to Allied troops. Here, B-26s hit a road bridge at Arles on the Rhone River, northwest of Marseille. A second bridge nearby had been previously flattened. As the convoy prepared to move shoreward, the sea was calm, in contrast to previous Mediterranean operations. The magnitude of naval fire was maintained as strongly as the air support. At 730 hours, the landing craft started plugging toward the shore. Heavy covering by both Navy and Air Forces continued. The huge convoy was preceded close inshore by minesweepers. Officers studied maps as H hour was at hand. 3 main landing beaches were in the Saint-Tropez, San Rafael areas. Pontoons by which heavy equipment could gain the beaches were launched, and as ducks ferried light material to the beaches, the pontoons were jockeyed into position. Smoke from phosphorus shells etched the shore. It had been anticipated that the outer rim of coastline would be hard to crack. Preliminary reconnaissance indicated shore defenses were solid, although not too well supported from behind. A few days before, anti-aircraft batteries were so thick along the entire coastal sector that planes officially recorded flak as intense. But they had been silenced, and now landing craft unloaded their men and supplies with almost no resistance in the first stages. By 830 hours, patrols were striking across the Riviera countryside, across land that had once been a world-famous playground, to consolidate positions inland with the airborne troops. Successful beachheads had been established and a new front opened. By mid-morning, engineers were already bringing up equipment to construct an airfield. Mine detectors cleared a prospective site, digging out 45-kilogram German shells, equipped with tripwire detonators. 25 like this one were found in an area 30 yards square. Bulldozers leveled the vineyards and orchards of French farmers. But even as the heavy equipment overran their homes, the French civilians were cooperative, disclosing locations of mines. Work on the construction of the runway was pushed ahead while the fighting continued nearby. Within 8 hours, marked progress had been made on a strip 150 feet wide by 3,000 feet long. Although resistance was met occasionally, there was no sign of concerted opposition. And except for a few casualties, some of them from parachute landings, it appeared as though the enemy had been caught entirely unprepared. Paratroops had little trouble making their way overland and soon met seaborne troops, closing lines that eventually interlaced the entire invasion area. French civilians mobilized to help them, solicitous of their smallest personal needs. By D-Day +1, as equipment rolled into Le Mouilly, swift advance had expanded the beachhead 500 square miles. Casualties continued to be extremely light. Unloadings exceeded expectations. Seaborne and airborne troops had met everywhere ashore, and assault forces were complete with tank and tank destroyer units and a well-balanced stock of ammunition and supplies. The same day, bombers continued to strengthen Allied gains. Installations were bombed at Toulon, which, with Marseille, offered organized resistance. But by August 23rd, Marseille, France's second city, fell, and Toulon was encircled. Mitchells passed abandoned gliders on their way to block any northern avenues of reinforcement. And as the reborn French army fought victoriously on its own soil again, blasts, like those on a bridge at Livron, sounded liberation over all of France.